Greetings, everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Mr. Quinn here for what will hopefully be a quick video recapping what it means to think like a political scientist, and as we begin to build back our skills for social studies. Hopefully, from United States history last year, many of you are familiar with these skills. But we're going to recap them today, and we're going to kick off an activity that we're going to be doing this week and we're going to be doing next week, which will culminate with you all writing your first argumentative essay of the year. As I mentioned previously, for government, you do have to pass the state exam at the end of the course in order to get the credit to graduate. And writing is a big part of that, right? Writing, no matter where you go in life, is going to be important. And being able to read, understand, analyze, and write about the world around you, especially politics in such a pivotal time in our history, is going to be really important. So thinking like a political scientist, skills building. So hopefully, these 4 historical thinking strategies are familiar to you. We have close reading, we have sourcing, we have contextualization, and we have corroboration, okay? Contextualization and corroboration. Sometimes those are the 2 that are kind of a mouthful, but just practice saying it and you'll get it. I get tripped up sometimes too, but never stop trying. So, close reading, I think, is the one that all of us are most familiar with. Close reading is annotating, engaging with the text. And so, engaging with the text may mean circling important words. It may be underlining important phrases, looking for the main idea, the key ideas of a text, right? Putting question marks where you may not understand something or where a question comes up. I wonder why he's saying that, or I wonder why she is reacting in this way, depending on what document you're looking at. Or looking at words that, I don't know what that word means. Let me look that up. So that's close reading. The main goal of close reading is to understand what is the text, what is the source talking about. Next is sourcing. So figuring out the who, what, why, when, and where of the text. Who wrote it? What's the author's perspective? Why was the text created? When was it from? And where was it? And then finally, is it reliable? Can you trust the source? You all have definitely heard of fake news. There is lots and lots out there on the internet that is not reliable. And so being able to judge the credibility, the reliability of a text, of a source is super, super important. This is also where you determine whether something is a primary source, meaning that it is from the time period you're talking about or from the event that it's talking about, or whether it's a secondary source, someone telling about something after the fact. If I was not there to view it, but I'm writing about it, then it would be a secondary account. Contextualization. So contextualization is simply looking at what else is going on at the moment that this source was created, right? And so what else is going on? What background knowledge do you have about it? What else is going on? And how might that have contributed to the document? And then finally, corroboration. So corroboration is probably the most complicated, but also the most important because it requires at least 2, if not more, sources, right? And the idea of corroboration is the sources talk to each other, right? Not actually, but you're going to make them talk to each other, right? Does source 1 and source 2 agree? Are they saying the same thing? Do they agree? Or are they contradicting each other? Are they saying opposite things? What about source 3? What about source 4? What when you put all 4 of these sources together, tell you about the question you're trying to answer? So corroboration is examining multiple sources and figuring out how they connect or don't connect with one another. All right, so those are the 4 historical thinking strategies: close reading, sourcing, contextualization, and corroboration. Next, let's go ahead and put these skills to work with a document that hopefully everyone is familiar with, the good old Declaration of Independence. And if you're cool like me, you have your own Declaration of Independence that you just keep handy for moments like this. Perhaps there's some future social studies teachers out there, and you can one day be like Mr. Quinn. Anywho, close reading. So if we were to close read the Declaration of Independence, then that would require us reading it, engaging with it, annotating it, looking for what are the key points, what are the main ideas, and asking questions throughout. Also, identifying those unfamiliar words, right? We're not going to do that right now. You can do that on your own if you would like. Also, we're going to be doing that later on in the school year, but close reading would mean we're engaging with the text, figuring out. Sourcing though, so sourcing, collecting the basic information about the text. So we know, A, it was written July 4th, 1776. We know it was written by Thomas Jefferson. We know it was signed by 56 leaders from the colonies. We also know that the purpose of the Declaration of Independence is to separate the United States from Great Britain, from England, right? And in the document, the colonies set forth their grievances, their complaints, the wrongdoings by King George of England against the colonists from the 13 colonies, and officially declare the United States independent from Great Britain. We also know that it is a primary source document because it is from 1776. It was written at the time by people who were there, so therefore it is a reliable document, right? And just a little bit of sourcing, whether in the document itself or online, can give us that background information to source the document. Next, contextualization. This is where you have to rely on your background knowledge a bit. So what else do you know about what's going on around the Declaration of Independence, right? We know that it's the start of the American Revolution, right? It's the moment the colonies declare independence, and then after that, we have the American Revolution. We also know, or hopefully we know, if you took me for US history, you certainly know that Great Britain, that England, at this point was the most powerful country in the world. Its imperial power, it owned land throughout the entire world. It colonized land throughout the entire world. The saying, the sun never sets on the British Empire. So we know that the little 13 colonies are going up against the massive, most powerful country in the world, Great Britain. We also know that in this document, the famous phrase, all men are created equal, is completely hypocritical, right? We know that it did not include women. We know that it did not include African Americans. We know that it did not include Native Americans. We know that it did not include pretty much anyone except wealthy white men who owned property, right? However, the document says all men are created equal, and so we know that that's where the line comes from, but we also know that it's not the truth in 1776, and that still today we are trying to reach that goal of equality and equity. And finally, corroboration. Corroboration we can't quite do because we don't have multiple documents, right? We're only doing it with one document here. But if I were to find, I don't know, a journal entry, a diary from Thomas Jefferson, and we compared the journal entry from Thomas Jefferson to the Declaration of Independence, are they talking about the same things? What about an account of the Boston Tea Party, right? No taxation without representation was the biggest grievance of them all. And so what would that account of the Boston Tea Party say, right? So this was just meant to be a quick example to make sure you understand close reading, sourcing, contextualization, corroboration. So what are we doing? This is the guide. These are, I should say, the multiple guided questions that we're going to be working with over the next 2 weeks. First, do you agree or disagree with the Supreme Court's opinion in Trump versus Hawaii? Does the travel ban protect the United States from terrorists? Does it unfairly target Muslims? And does the travel ban uphold the values of the United States? These are the questions that I want you thinking about every step of the way over the next 2 weeks, because we're not talking about back then, we're talking about just the past few years. So in 2017, Trump issued an executive order banning travel and immigration to the United States from certain countries. Those countries were predominantly Muslim countries, and it resulted in a Supreme Court case in which we questioned, is this illegal or not? And we're going to take a look at that case, and we're also going to compare it to something hopefully you're familiar with from US history last year, which is the Japanese internment camps during World War II. So the goal for this week, as I mentioned, this is a 2-week thing. The first week, we're looking at the historical context of the travel ban by examining the Supreme Court decision on Japanese internment camps during World War II. All right? The way we're going to do that, we need to make sure that A, you understand the 4 historical thinking strategies, which hopefully this video has helped you do. If you don't, you can go back, and in here I have embedded other resource videos that you can watch for each of these 4 historical thinking strategies. Just click on the appropriate strategy. Second, right now, we're going to go through document 1 of this activity, of this thinking like a political scientist activity, and I'm going to do it with you, all right? I'm going to do it here on the PowerPoint. All you have to do is watch this video and complete exactly what I'm doing, but on your own document. And then finally, independently over the next few days, you all voted that Sunday is the day that your weekly assignments due. So this Sunday, you need to independently complete documents 2 and 3. One is a political cartoon, one is another text, and you need to complete the analysis of those and submit it for Sunday. And then next week, we're going to investigate documents from the past few years, looking at Trump's travel ban and the Supreme Court case surrounding it, Hawaii versus Trump, and then ultimately write an argumentative essay in which you answer these guided questions. So let's go ahead and look at text number 1. So text number 1, it is included in the link right here. So if we just follow this link, it will open up text number 1. Text number 1 is a New York Times article from 2018. Korematsu, notorious Supreme Court ruling. Oopsie. Why are things popping up? Go away. Korematsu, notorious Supreme Court ruling on Japanese internment is finally tossed out, by Charlie Savage, July 26, 2018. So we're going to read this. We're going to annotate it as we go. So, in the annals of Supreme Court history, a 1944 decision to uphold the forcible internment of Japanese Americans during World War II has long stood out as a stain that is almost universally recognized as a shameful mistake. So, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to highlight this because I think that's pretty powerful. It's pretty powerful language. A stain that is almost universally recognized as a shameful mistake. Yet, the notorious precedent, Korematsu versus United States, remained law because no case gave justices a good opportunity to overrule it. What does the word precedent mean? I don't know. Let me go ahead. What does this word mean? If I were to look it up, if I were to do a quick Google search, what does precedent mean? I would know that it is a previous court ruling that stands as understood law. So essentially, a previous court ruling that is determined, and then that court ruling is now law of the land. Okay? So even though Korematsu versus United States is seen as a stain, it is precedent, and so therefore it's been the law of the land since, because no other case has ever challenged it. But on Tuesday, when the Supreme Court's conservative majority upheld President Trump's ban on travel into the United States by citizens of several predominantly Muslim countries, Chief Justice John J. John G. Roberts Jr., also seized the moment to finally overrule Korematsu. The forcible relocation of U.S. citizens to concentration camps solely and explicitly based on the race is objectively unlawful and outside the scope of presidential authority, he wrote, citing language used by then Justice Robert H. Jackson in a dissent to the 1944 ruling. Chief Justice Roberts added, Korematsu was gravely wrong the day it was decided, has been overruled in the court of history, and to be clear, has no place under the Constitution. So I'm going to put a quick note here that officially Korematsu is overturned. So Korematsu has been the Korematsu decision in which it upheld Japanese internment camps during World War II, putting Japanese Americans into concentration camps and holding them there, was declared constitutional during World War II. It has officially been overturned with this Trump versus Hawaii decision. So as of now, the decision is overturned. In a dissent to the travel ban, so dissent, what does dissent mean? Let me look up what dissent means, and after I look it up, I would know that dissent means to disagree, okay? So the side that disagrees with a court ruling writes a dissent, okay? Justice Sonia Sotomayor offered tepid applause. While the formal repudiation of a shameful precedent is laudable and long overdue, she said, it failed to make the court's decision to uphold the travel ban acceptable or right. She accused the Justice Department and the court's majority of adopting troubling parallels between the two cases. So it seems like, I feel like this quote is important. So she accused the Justice Department and the court's majority of adopting troublesome parallels between the two cases. So she is essentially saying that she believes that the wrong decision in the Korematsu case is similar to the wrong decision here. I'm curious what she says. So in both cases, she wrote, the court deferred to the Trump administration's invocation of an ill-defined national security threat to justify an exclusionary policy of sweeping proportion. That is an exact quote from the text. And so I'm going to go ahead and highlight that because that could be good to come back to. Relying on stereotypes about a particular group amid strong evidence that impersonable hostility and animosity motivated the government's policy. So Justice Sotomayor is saying that she believes that the Trump executive order did not justify, did not explain why it was banning certain people from traveling to the United States, and that it created hostility and animosity, which created the decision. So, believes Trump executive order was based upon hate and stereotype, is what I hear Justice Sotomayor saying. The fallacies in Korematsu were echoed in the travel ban ruling, warned Hiroshima Munomura, a University of California, Los Angeles law professor who has written extensively about immigration. Overruling Korematsu the way the court did in this case reduces the overruling to symbolism that is so bare that it is deeply troubling, given the parts of the reasoning behind Korematsu that live on in today's decision. A willingness to paint with a broad brush by nationality, race, or religion by claiming national security grounds. By the way, what do we mean by national security? Maybe I should look that up. Look it up. All right, national security refers to decisions made to protect the U.S. homeland. Okay? He added, if the majority really wanted to bury Korematsu, they would have struck down the travel ban. The Korematsu ruling, an exceedingly rare modern example in which the court explicitly upheld government discrimination against an entire category of people based on a trait like race or ethnicity, traced back to the early days after Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in the US, after the US entered World War II. So it seems like now we're getting, this is the history of the Korematsu decision and case itself. Okay, so we're sort of getting a history lesson here. In 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued an executive order that permitted the military to exclude any or all persons from militarily sensitive areas to prevent espionage and sabotage. If I don't know what espionage means, I can look it up, and it means spying. And to house them in internment camps. The military used that power to order all people of Japanese ancestry, including American citizens, removed from the West Coast. Fred Korematsu, an American citizen living on the West Coast, refused to leave and was convicted of disobeying a military order. With help from the American Civil Liberties Union, he appealed the verdict to the Supreme Court, but the court voted 6-3 to uphold the internment policy as a justified national security measure amid a wartime emergency. So with the Korematsu decision, it was upheld because it was seen as a way to protect national security. However, it seems like that may not be completely true. Years later, as World War II receded and the civil rights movement unfolded, that policy and the Supreme Court ruling upholding it became widely seen as wrong. In 1982, a congressional commission called the policy a grave injustice that stemmed from racial prejudice, war hysteria, and failed political leadership. In a concurrence, the government said the decision in Korematsu lies overruled in the court of history. So the court of history, I think, is a powerful line, right? So that's people have agreed that it was wrong and that it was motivated by racial prejudice and war hysteria and failed political leadership. I'm noting that down in the comments because I think that quote may be useful if I were to, I don't know, write an essay about this. In 1988, Congress passed a law signed by President Ronald Reagan providing $20,000 in reparations to each surviving detainee. Reparations, what are reparations? So reparations are payments made to right a wrong, all right? A dozen years later, Justice Anthony Scalia invoked Korematsu as one of the most notorious mistakes of the court, along with the Dred Scott decision, the pre-Civil War case denying freedom and citizenship to Black slaves brought into free states. A district court judge vacated Mr. Korematsu's conviction in 1984, citing in part the discovery that Roosevelt-era Justice Department misled the judiciary about the need for the policy, including by citing claims that Japanese Americans were signaling offshore submarines that the executive branch had already decided were probably not true. So here it's saying that the court was misled with untrue evidence to support the ban, okay? But because the government did not try again to detain entire categories of people in a protected class like race or religion, no case presented a good vehicle for the Supreme Court to overrule the president. The travel ban case, however, brought Korematsu back to the forefront. It traced back to Mr. Trump's campaign proposal in 2015 to categorically bar Muslims from entering the US. So in 2015, the Trump campaign proposed categorically banning Muslims from the US. So before becoming president, Trump proposed banning all Muslims from the US. At the time, Mr. Trump cited with approval Roosevelt's actions, including wartime restrictions placed on Americans of Japanese, German, and Italian ancestry, and said he was not going that far. Take a look at what FDR did many years ago, Mr. Trump said at the time. He did the same thing. Over time, Mr. Trump's call for a complete ban on Muslims entering the US evolved into a ban on entry by nationals from a list of troubled countries, most of which were predominantly Muslim. Under the law, President Trump has the authority to bar groups of foreigners for national security reasons. So here's an important thing. So it tells us, well, first, I'm going to go ahead and highlight this, that it evolved into a ban on entry by nationals from a list of troubled countries, is what Trump called, and that most of those countries were predominantly Muslim. And that under the law, the president is allowed to bar entry of groups based off of national security. So that is allowed. However, the question is, or barring people from coming to the country for national security is allowed. However, the question is him banning predominantly Muslim countries without security threat allowed? And that's what the Supreme Court is deciding. So the dispute between the Supreme Court was whether to block the government from carrying out a version of the ban that Mr. Trump issued in September. Even though that directive was neutral about religion, the history and context, like Mr. Trump's political rhetoric, suggested it was tainted by unconstitutional religious discrimination. So it did not specifically say Muslims are banned. However, because of his past comments, because of the context, it's fishy, it's suspicious. As the case unfolded, children of Japanese Americans held in the detention camps and several public interest groups filed 2 supporting briefs under the Supreme Court to see Mr. Trump's latest travel ban as essentially a new version of Roosevelt's order, demanding that the courts defer the president's claimed national security judgments when he is, at least in effect, singling out an entire category of people based on a discriminatory animus. So this tells us that public interest groups are claiming both cases were based on discrimination and not legitimate national security threats. All right. But in his majority opinion, Chief Justice Roberts argued that Roosevelt's act had nothing to do with the travel ban case. The morally repugnant order that forced Japanese Americans from their West Coast homes and into detention camps solely and explicitly on the basis of race was different from a facially neutral policy denying certain foreign nationals the privilege of admission into the country, he wrote. So Chief Justice Roberts supports, Roberts does not support Korematsu case, but says Trump's travel ban is entirely different. The entry suspension is an act that is well within executive authority and could have been taken by any other president. The only question is evaluating the actions of this particular president in promulgating an otherwise valid proclamation, he wrote. Justice Sotomayor, in her dissent, however, suggested that Chief Justice Roberts' majority decision in Trump versus Hawaii may go down in the Supreme Court history as a second coming of Korematsu. By blindly accepting the government's misguided invitation to sanction a discriminatory policy motivated by animosity towards a disfavored group, all in the name of a superficial claim of national security, the court redeploys the same dangerous logic underlining Korematsu and merely replaces one gravely wrong decision with another. So I'm going to highlight this. Merely replaces one gravely wrong decision with another. And so Justice Sotomayor says, even though the court has officially overturned Korematsu's case, they are making the same mistake by ruling in favor of Trump's. So that is what the article has told us. So now let's go to this chart. So we've close read. Now it's time to go ahead and source the document. So who wrote it? We said, what did we say his name was? We said Charles or Charlie Savage, okay? So, let's see. Charlie Savage, a New York Times reporter. What is the author's perspective? Do we get an impression that the author has a particular perspective? It sort of seems like he is arguing, or he is presenting, let's say he is presenting the argument against the travel ban Supreme Court decision. When was it written? 2018. Where was it written? New York City. Why was it written? To inform the public of the parallels between cases. And is it reliable? New York Times is a pretty reputable source. It definitely does have bias, but every single source has bias. And if we were to go and we were to look at the details, this has exact language from the both majority opinion of Justice Roberts, the dissenting opinion from Justice Sotomayor. It includes exact quotes from Trump, and it brings in exact historical details from the Korematsu case. So it is reliable because we could fact check any of those things elsewhere and it would be true. So contextualization, what else do we know is going on at the time of this, right? We know that Trump is anti-immigration. He has made that part of his policy his entire presidency. So we know he's anti-immigration. We know that since 9/11, there has been large discrimination towards Muslims, Muslim Americans, and Muslims in general. So we know that since 9/11, that's been a very big problem in this country. We also know that since then, since the travel ban, there have been other questionable immigration decisions made by the Trump administration. And we're going to be talking about a lot of those. So corroboration, we would need to look at what some of the other documents say. So we cannot quite corroborate this yet because we need other documents. So that's where you all come in. So what you all are doing for your assignment before Sunday is you are filling out this chart. We're going to start this week and we're going to finish next week. So I have done document 1 with you. You just need to fill in boxes 1 or 2, fill in box 3 after you've done documents 2 and 3, and then you are going to access document 2, the link of which is right here. You can just click on it to bring you to the political cartoon. Document 3 is right here. You're going to do the same thing I did with document 1 to documents 2 and 3. And that is the assignment that is due for all of you on Sunday. Do the best that you can. This is the first time we're doing it this year, so just do the best you can. Next week, our focus is going to be working on and making sure that we are good with this, and we're going to start examining more contemporary documents from the travel ban decision. Ultimately, you all writing an argumentative essay talking about whether you agree or disagree with the Supreme Court opinion in Trump versus Hawaii, and whether or not you believe the travel ban is a national security protection or is discriminatory against Muslims. So that is what we will do next week. For Sunday, you're completing this chart. Feel free to reference this video. Feel free to reference this PowerPoint. Feel free to reference the documents. You will need to do all of that. And I will see you all next week. Please don't hesitate to email me if you have any questions or concerns. Take care.